Welcome to Good Things Happening, the show that explores the sustainability progress that's being made just under the surface at your favorite brand or company. I'm your host, Derek Sabori, and these are the people making it happen. All right, Mackenzie, how you doing today?
Doing well, Derek. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Nice to be here for another one of our weekly updates, one of our sessions where we dive into talk about the things that you've been putting together in the newsletter, sort of a curated list of 3 items. We send this out every week to all of our subscribers, right? Which is great. But this is our opportunity to dive in and talk about those things. So I'm excited to be here and talk about some great things that you've got on the list. You ready to dive in?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Well, let's also give a little update to you for those of you guys watching. We're just trying to find our scheduling here, right? So this will be a blend of, we've got expert interview pieces that we're doing on the show as well. So we just dropped our first one with Trey and Akira. They are the founders of Pangea Seed Foundation, Trey Packard and Akira Biondo. And it was great. These are guys that are doing some amazing work with their nonprofit organization. We've got another one that'll drop next week. So we'll probably get into this flow of expert interview, weekly highlights with me and you, expert interview, et cetera. So just kind of as an update to listeners. But Mackenzie, did you get a chance to listen to that interview that I did with Trey and Akira? What'd you think?
Yeah, I did. And I think it was super valuable. One thing that really stood out to me was these expert interviews, I think, are going to be great for students and young professionals who are trying to figure out what they want to do. Maybe they know, I want to be in sustainability, but I don't know exactly what that means or what jobs are out there. I think these expert interviews do a great job of telling people, especially, newcomers to the scene like me, it's like, hey, there's actually some cool jobs out here, some cool organizations. So I thought another thing that Trey and Akira did a really great job of is explaining that it's not a quick turnaround. Starting a nonprofit is not just, you open up the gates and you hit the ground running. It can take a while to get the funding, get the resources you need, get the staff. So I thought I really appreciated their transparency and their honest approach to explaining how to develop a business.
Well, and it took them 10 years. So I always
Right.
laugh, I think whenever you're doing something, it's a 10-year overnight success. So it just takes time. And I agree. I think it is helpful to hear. And that's the whole point, is to share these kind of career pathways and give people insight to kind of behind the scenes. We've just recently recorded one with Teresa McKinney. She's the head of sustainability over for the brand Nemo. And wait until you get to hear of that one, listen to that one, because it's her career background, her kind of college background, going to the internship, getting the master's degree, getting the job, and getting the job that she didn't think she originally wanted, but how it helped. It just pieces together these career pathways that I agree, I think are really valuable. If people will listen, young people can listen, or people of any age, we're all building our careers kind of constantly. But I think these are good reminders of how other people have done it and how they might have landed in either the impact space or in a sustainability role or position. So yeah, I agree with you. I also just love the fact that they're using art as a means of communication to kind of win people over with sustainability and conservation and climate action concepts. So check them out. Amazing visuals if you go to their website, Pangea Seed Foundation. These guys, it's a very small team doing a lot of work with a global, and it's a reminder too that it's a global network. It's a collaborative effort. There's just a few of them at their core, but their reach and their connections to just people all over the world doing this great work with them is, I think, really inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's dive in then. What do we got on our list this week? This is the part where we look at what you've put together, what you found out there in the news space. What do we need to know about? What do you want to dive into? What should we start with?
First things first, I think we need to start with the NPR Throughline episode that just came out. I believe it was last week. It's called The Ghost in Your Phone. And to provide a little background on NPR's Throughline, I have to say, maybe this is a little biased, but it's one of my absolute favorite podcasts. I think they've won either 1 or 2 Pulitzers now. The team does great research. Yeah, I just think they do a great job of connecting current events to historical events. So bringing it all together and painting a clear picture of where we are across a number of different topics, not even just sustainability, but culture and development. It's so crazy to hear these historical events and see that it's still, in a way, persists today.
Well, I think the name says it all. And you've mentioned this podcast before, and I had not taken the time to, I think, to listen to any of the episodes until now. So this one is great. I can't wait to talk about it real quickly. But their show description says the past is never past. Every headline has a history. Join us every week as we go back in time to understand the present. These are stories you can feel and sounds you can see from the moments that shaped our world. And I think that's really apropos. The ghost in our phone, like this one here, right, is really kind of eye-opening. And what's interesting, I think it's almost disheartening too, because it's not anything necessarily that we didn't know. It's just sometimes hard to face and remember and look at. Give us a little, what led you to this piece particularly, and what, kind of prompted you to put it into the list here and talk about it?
Well, I think, Derek, as you know, and maybe some of our members know, in our member resource center, I've started building this environmental justice and environmental racism module. And so I've been doing research and kind of learning about things. And I'll admit, I am not, Derek, as you know, the most technologically savvy person. I'm not into the electronics. I don't stay up to date. And so that's a fault of mine, that I'm not as aware what goes into our electronics. So listening to this episode, I figured that was a good opportunity for me to learn more about what actually goes into making a computer or an electric vehicle or a cell phone. And it is really disheartening to learn that so much of what we need to make these devices comes from impoverished developing nations that have a long history of colonization, and it hasn't gone away, and nobody has really done anything to right the wrongs of the past and put us on the correct course today.
Well, and I think what's really interesting too is, all of these minerals that you're talking about in our electronics, one, it's our phones. Two, it's the revolution that is happening right now in the automobile industry, right? As we transition to EVs, as we, look to batteries to store all of the energy that's created. But this next chapter, I think, of human civilization will rely heavily on electricity, storage of electricity, and yes, nickel, cobalt, copper. In this case, in this story, it's the cobalt they're talking about.
Right.
But there are natural resource rich places in the world, and those natural resources that we rely on, these are elements that are found in the the periodic table of elements, right? So these are found in the earth, but they're not available just everywhere and anywhere. And it just seems the African continent tends to have a lot of these natural resources, very low wages, people that are kind of in dire situations. And it just seems that those that are in power or with financial means sort of kind of exploit that. And I couldn't help, Mackenzie, as I listened to this, to think about, whether it was the textile industry built on the back of slaves, basically on the slave trade, whether it was that. Learning from this as well, that the first automobile revolution was the rubber tires that was from exploitation in the Democratic Republic of Congo, that it's all been tied together. So every time we have these forward moving things in civilization that we call revolution, it's built on the backs of humans, and a lot of times suffering. So to me, it was the textile industry, the automobile industry, and now we're about to do it again, and it's happening again. But it seems like they're trying to tell the story, paint the picture, and say, hey, this is repeating itself. What do we do now? How do we go forward? Is that right?
Right. Yeah. And I think it goes back to something that we always talk about, Derek, is that it depends. When we talk about sustainability and innovations, it's, well, is it sustainable? Is it not sustainable? And in the conversation with electric vehicles, which are all the rage, and here in at least America, they're becoming cheaper, more widely available for more people in different income brackets. And it's kind of like, well, now for me, I know I'm going to have to get a new car probably next year. I'm like, ooh, geez, do I want to get an electric vehicle, or what is the what's the more sustainable thing to do? So I'm kind of left with a question mark over my head as to what to do next. So I think this is one of those things where we're just, I mean, I think for me, I'm like, oh, we need better traceability and we need to figure out ways to provide living wages. And it falls on the responsibility of specifically the EV industry, looking at the auto manufacturers. They need to provide living wages to the countries where we get these minerals from. And, but yeah, I just don't know. There's so many questions that I have. And yeah, I don't know what the next step forward is.
Well, I think, and this will probably segue here and lead us into our next topic, because I think, one, if you haven't checked out Throughline, go check out the podcast. This is for the listeners, and check out this Ghost in Your Phone piece. It's really well done. It's a little over an hour long, I believe, and it just kind of wakes you up to the idea of like, ooh, we all need to kind of question, I think, with every purchase though, and whether it's your EV, whether it's your clothing, whether it's your phone, whatever it is, we can ask the questions of, well, where did this come from? Who made this? Where did the raw materials come? And this is what we're always talking about. And this is why traceability is so important. Most of us as consumers, though, won't have good insights into where the minerals were sourced, how they were sourced, because even in, I think, the DRC, there are companies that are using, big mining equipment. In a lot of the mining industries, I mean, they have these massive, trucks and lifts and diggers, whatever they are, right? But in this case, they're using humans instead, because it's very, very cheap labor, and people are lining up to say, hey, I'd rather take this risk and get paid to have something. But there are companies that are doing it with machines and probably doing it more responsibly. I'm sure, and this is something we can dive into later, I guess, and try to do some research on, there are probably standards and certifications, responsible mining standards and audits that can take place. But you don't hear a lot about that. I think, though, once you start going and diving into websites, I know when we were shopping for EVs, that is something, a lot of the different cars, whether it's like Fisker, Polaris, there are cars that are really kind of touting all of their responsible practices, whether it comes to the materials, the minerals that are in batteries. So it may not be perfect, but I do see a lot of acknowledgement. So I think it just takes some studying, but I think we can't hold back this tide. This electrification of everything is happening. We know it's one thing. It's one of the things that will help us, combat the climate crisis, but
Right.
it can't be done on the backs of others and vulnerable people. And that's kind of been our story that we've been trying to talk about all throughout, right? And especially coming from the apparel industry, but it just seems like it's every industry, every product, chocolate, coffee,
Yeah.
you name it, textiles, t-shirts, cars, whatever it is, our phones. Like, oh my gosh, what have we done? Are we doomed as humans? What do you think? What do you think, Mackenzie? Can we get ourselves out of this?
Yeah, I would like to think that we can. I think the younger generation is much more keyed into this stuff and aware and not willing to tolerate it. I think there's so many young people who are in college right now, or going into college soon, or just starting their career, who are thinking of ways where we can still have business development and grow and scale our businesses where they're profitable without negatively impacting people around the world. And yeah, I think there's opportunity. I hope there's opportunity for sure.
Well, I wonder, so let's move on to our next item here then. So you put in the newsletter a link to the work that the European Parliament is doing. And I wonder if, this is their effort as well. This is them saying, hey, we can no longer do business the way we've done, especially when it comes to textiles. So you put this article in here that was sort of an update from the Parliament saying the Parliament wants to make EU textiles and clothing industry greener. And this was earlier this month. And it really feels like the language that they're doing is kind of riding, on the coattails of what you just said, that, younger generations demand more, they expect more, and that we should be doing better. And almost taking this approach that, hey, now that we know, we cannot continue to go down this path. So tell me a little bit about what prompted you to put this one in here. What are your takeaways from it? Because I think there's some really interesting things in here, and fascinating language to me, actually, to be honest, that this is coming from a government body on sustainability.
Right. And I think what caught my eye with this one, you had actually forwarded this to me in my inbox. And when I opened up the full press release, exactly what you said. It was the language where it's like, whoa, like this is kind of very passionate and very they took a strong stance, which I feel like we don't, at least here in the States, I feel like our politicians don't really do that. You know, you kind of know which way someone's leaning, but it seems like it's very rare for an entire government body to take a strong stance on something. So that, as an American, an outside perspective looking in, it's like, whoa, this is actually really cool that
Mm.
they're so vocal about this. So this is still a development. It's still in the process. They're still working on this sustainable and circular textile strategy. So what this press release was highlighting was that new recommendations were approved. They took a vote on it. The EU Parliament took a vote on it, and new recommendations were approved. So they're going to be continuously updating this strategy and making changes and new additions. And there's not a lot of details on it so far, and I'm sure it'll probably take a few months, a few years to get really solid details on what's going to be in it. But I think it's pretty interesting what they included in there.
Well, it is, and this has been going on for years, right? So this is just kind of they keep building on this and adding these updates. It's their strategy for sustainable and circular textiles, and this was an update. They're saying that they want tougher measures to fight excessive production and consumption of textiles. They are saying that products should last longer and be easier to reuse, repair, and recycle. They're saying that clothing and footwear should be produced in a circular, sustainable, and socially just way. And there's a call for a ban on the destruction of unsold and returned textile goods. Mackenzie, I'm sure that you've heard, this is a big problem area in the industry, because we're not always in the textile industry, in the apparel industry, we're not always very good at producing what we call to demand.
Mm-hmm.
So the calendar cycle is a lot earlier. There's a long lead time. It takes 45 days to make fabric, and then it takes another 45 days to cut and sew. There's 15 days for dyeing, whatever it is. So sometimes 45, 60 to 90 to 180 days sometimes to get products made. You have to, though, retailers and brands have to start booking those sales ahead of time. So they sort of kind of a lot of times forecast or punt on these orders. And they'll say, well, I think we need 1 million of those. I think we need 2 million of those, 5,000 of that color, of this color. So a lot of times, if that demand doesn't reach that order, we're stuck with excess inventory. And it happens all the time. And this is actually why we have, discount stores, where off-price stores, where we've sent our overproduction to them at a discount, because brands will take a margin hit. But ironically, that has become its own sales channel, because that business became so big, a place that we used to just dump things over to. Now, like, ooh, we'll actually make cheaper product for them, because that is a good sales channel as well. All the Ross, TJ Maxx, Marshalls, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got that going on. Even with all those outlets, there is still product that needs to be discarded, because one, there's just no demand for it. Maybe you made the wrong color. Maybe it was a bad batch of goods. Maybe there was a defect in it. Maybe it was who knows? All of these, maybe it got damaged in transport. What do we do with all of these things? We've been talking a lot about circularity. Right now, there is no way to take all of those thousands or millions of units and just say, oh, put them into this recycler, and it spits out new fiber and yarn for us, and we'll call it a day. So brands have to figure out ways to either try to move that inventory or sell it, or ship it to a developing country. Maybe sometimes they strip off the labels, or sometimes they don't, or they burn and incinerate it. And
Mm-hmm.
this EU legislation is saying that, hey, there's going to be a ban on that. We're not going to be able to do that very often, or you're not going to be able to do that anymore. So this has a repercussion, so not just on brands that are in the EU, but that's a big market as well. So even US brands that are selling into the EU are going to have to play by these rules as well. What were some of the other big takeaways? I know there was a quote in here, I think, that I thought was pretty interesting. Did you see that from the? And actually, I learned a new word in this article: rapporteur.
Me too. I know. I had never heard of that one. They have a quote in here from rapporteur Delara Burkhart. I believe that's how you pronounce her name. I apologize if it's not.
And a rapporteur is basically like a reporter, somebody delivering the message, right? Is what I learned.
Right. I believe so. I believe that was my understanding. And goodness gracious, they are passionate. So they said in their quote, they said, consumers alone cannot reform the global textile sector through their purchasing habits. If we allow the market to self-regulate, we leave the door open for a fast fashion model that exploits people and the planet's resources. People and the planet are more important than the textile industry's profits. And she continues on with her quote, but that was kind of the section that I pulled out where it's like, yeah, that's passionate. And I mean, honestly, I feel like that's kind of hitting the nail on the head, where it's that's the current climate that we're in. And yeah, we need to be moving. Brands, retailers need to think that way, where people and planet are more important than profit. So
Yeah, so this is a big pushback against fast fashion. And they're saying
right.
specific measures that are going to be addressed in this are that consumers should have more information to make sustainable choices. There's that ban that I talked about on unsold products. There's a revision of their eco design regulation, which is put together or outlined in their sustainable and circular textiles piece. The MEPs, or members of European Parliament, want clear rules to stop greenwashing by producers. So they want ongoing legislative work to empower consumers in the green transition, to regulating green claims. I'm hearing this a lot from the brands that we talk to and work with, that this pressure is real, and this will really cause them to make some changes. I wanted to point out real quick as well that from that, this is all based around these expectations for that sustainable and circular textiles legislation that they're putting together, their strategy, I should say, that they've got these eco design requirements. So really focusing on just designing better, making better, being prepared for recycling, cleaner inputs. Also, the stopping of destruction of unsold or returned textiles. They're going to tackle microplastic pollution. They're introducing information requirements for a digital product passport, which means that your product should be able to, let's say you have your phone, you can scan it and you can see all of the inputs that are in there. What fibers this product was made of, what dye stuffs were added. That allows you to know how to disassemble it and recycle it at its end of life. Also having, green claims for truly sustainable textiles, extending the extended producer responsibility and boosting reuse and recycling of textile waste. So this is a really holistic piece of work that they're putting together. It's been going on for years. We'll put the link in here so you guys can check it out. Mackenzie, any other thoughts on this? Because there's another piece here that I want to touch on real quick that sort of launches off of this to start talking about these points. Anything else we need to let everybody know about this update?
There's nothing else that I think we need to let people know right now, other than we're going to be doing updates on this when more information becomes available. And as those details become more concrete, we'll do follow-ups and we'll see. And there's also actually, I think, kind of springing off of this, what's going on in Europe. I just was reading something that there's new movement happening in Australia too. So maybe we'll cover that next week.
Yeah, and we wrote in one of the newsletters, I think as well, this idea, and for a while there was this idea floating. People were calling for a fashion czar here in the U.S.
Right.
And I still think, that's interesting. It seems like other countries and other governments are really tackling this issue. I don't know how much the U.S. is as well that I can think of. I know the United Nations is tackling textiles and apparel industry as well. So we'll see where this goes. Maybe we can do something as well to kind of pull out some of these points from this EU push and start to do an outline and help people understand it better. But
totally.
For now, let's move to this. Our last piece is a piece that we found from the World Economic Forum. It's in their climate change section. This was from June 6th. And this is on recycled material could help tackle many of fast fashion's environmental problems. Here's how. What I thought was interesting about this one, Mackenzie, is that you and I just have done some conversations or had conversations on Greenpeace pushing back on the use of recycled materials and saying, especially the way that we're using recycled materials, the way that we're using them now is not actually sustainable, so that we need to be doing better. Did you catch anything different in this article that's saying anything different, or are they in line with that, or what do you think after looking at this one?
I think this one, I don't know if I would say it's in line with Greenpeace. I think they point out some good filler that maybe Greenpeace left out of their report, or maybe, some blind spots maybe that Greenpeace didn't acknowledge. I think this little breakdown does a great job of pointing those things out and being like, yeah, but, that's our classic yeah, but.
Yeah, exactly. The old yabbit. But this, I think, focused on, hey, recycling can be great. What they're acknowledging, though, I think Greenpeace is saying, hey, if you're recycling another industry's waste, specifically fossil fuel based waste, i.e., plastic bottles, to break those down to put into your t-shirts and sweatshirts, that's not sustainable. That is not a solution that we should rely on. One, it's just going to continue the reliance on fossil fuels. Two, there's continued use of microfiber pollution issues that we have to deal with. And three, it's not having another industry take accountability for their own waste. So they're saying that's a problem. But that is where most of the recycled material at this point, up to this date, comes from, is plastic bottles. This article, though, this World Economic Forum article, I think is really talking more about textile to textile recycling efforts
Mm-hmm.
and acknowledging that the way forward will be from recycling our own scraps. And so a lot of this is saying, hey, there are great innovations happening with post consumer or pre industrial textile waste, right? Pre industrial is cutting floor scraps, all the leftovers at the industrial point while you're making your goods. We should be able to collect those back, make that into new fiber, new yarns, new fabric. Ideally, we're also taking products back from the consumer, that's post consumer, and doing the same thing, have the ability to break those down. This article is saying that while the fast fashion model, and again, they're acknowledging fast fashion, that it's we've got to fix it, we've got to move forward. They're saying that it has delivered low prices for consumers, but it's come at a social and environmental costs, which are much higher than those lower costs. Says that technology is transforming the recycled materials landscape and it could improve the industry by tackling some of its sustainability problems, and that using recycled material in clothing can help reduce emissions and encourage more sustainable fashion manufacturing practices. So, did anything for you, Mackenzie, sort of stand out? Anything in particular out of here?
I think one of the things that really stood out is this conversation. This is one of those things that I have seen so often in the sustainable fashion versus fast fashion conversation is price and quality. And so I think this really, and Derek, you know way more about the qualities of recycled materials than I do. I know there's been, I think they actually mentioned that in here that they say myth, recycled yarn is of lower quality than virgin yarn. And that's, I mean, I am not an expert in that area whatsoever. And I don't work with materials and I never have. And I know you have experience with that. So maybe you can bust that myth. But I think one of the things that really stood out to me is this like, how do we make sustainable, quote unquote, for those who aren't watching the video, how do we make fast fashion sustainable for people who can't afford the responsible companies, like they can't afford the Patagonias or the Reformations or all they can afford for their kids or for themselves as college students, they can only afford Forever 21 or H&M. That's one of those, I guess, juxtapositions that I always find myself thinking about, like, gosh, how do we make this as equitable as possible for people?
So basically, how do we make sustainability affordable and to your point, accessible for everyone? I think that comes with scaling. I think this goes back to the EU of them making that effort of kind of coming in saying, hey, there have to be regulations on this. The market will not do it on its own because the market is built to chase after the cheapest, quickest way. So if you're measuring your business success without having or being forced to take into account those true costs or those externalities or just all of these things that we're talking about when it comes to sustainability, then it's just not going to happen. So there has to be this merging, I think. And that's why I think this ties nicely to that EU piece. I
Right.
think what's interesting is, you mentioned this article is great because they just say, hey, we have to fix this fast fashion cycle without changing the business model, though. But they're saying this model may not change, though, because people like having access to new products. They like low cost goods. So they're saying the high use of recycled materials appears to be one of the only ways to help make improvements. So you can be the judge of that, or have a look in here and see if you agree. They're saying that a market that repurposes these materials for new use does create a financial incentive to collect unwanted textiles. So if we create demand for these recycled inputs, then a new market will be created. There is technology that is coming. And I do like, you pointed it out, that they've put together these myths, and they've said that there's a myth that recycled yarn is more costly than virgin yarn. There's a myth that recycled yarn is of lower quality, that fabrics made from a blend of materials cannot be recycled. And they break them down and say, hey, these things are not necessarily the case. In the past, to answer your question, you brought this up, Mackenzie, recycled inputs were more expensive. And in most cases, they kind of still are, but we're getting closer to price parity. Mm-hmm. Lower quality, they were shorter staple fibers, et cetera, but there are new advancements. There are new companies doing really amazing work and we've put a lot of them in the newsletter. We always try to share, companies that are doing great work. But this is a really exciting and evolving space that of startups and innovators that are focusing on pre and post-consumer textile input waste and making new products from them. So the quality is better than ever. And those blended materials, we are getting better at recycling those. That was always the limitation as well, though. Recycling was only available for monofilament products, basically, or monofiber, basically. So meaning if it was 100% polyester, we could recycle it pretty easily. If it was 100% cotton or if it was 100% nylon, if you look, I think our last episode, we urged listeners to have a look at your care label and see what your products are made of. Very few of them are made from one input. Even your t-shirt is probably a blend of some sort. We are just now getting into that realm where innovators and solution providers are able to deal with those blends and break them down. So I think it's a good article with some interesting things, and it felt a little hopeful to me. But I do think it was great, kind of bouncing off of the Greenpeace thing that we did, alluding to what's going on in the EU, to putting this together. It all kind of ties together. It's all interconnected. This is the whole purpose of these conversations and what we always talk about. So I don't know. Those are three good pieces I think can be kind of thought-provoking for you guys out there to process and break down. Any other things, Mackenzie? What should we? Any other thoughts to leave our listening audience with?
Nothing else. I think really just I encourage everyone to go through these articles, or like that NPR podcast episode, give that a listen. And yeah, I think just forming your own opinion, kind of that's one of the coolest things that I love about my job, is being able to read these different articles. Like one week reading Greenpeace saying, no, we shouldn't, be using recycled plastics in this way. And then coming back and reading World Economic Forum, and it's like, oh, but we just have to do it better. And so I think it's really interesting. There's a lot of opportunity for people, if you can take the time, if you have some extra time in your calendar, to go through these articles and pick out a few pieces, question it, do more research. I think that's one of the best ways to learn, and just keep asking questions.
Okay, so I'm going to push back. This is my ending quote, is that not if you can, but I think you must. I think it's imperative that we all make the time for this, right? I do think it's important that all of us have to kind of tune into this. And there is no this is just complicated stuff. And there's always a different opinion and a different angle and a different lens to look at it through. And the deeper we dive, the harder it gets. But I think the more that all of us make this a part of our daily routine, of our jobs, no matter what role you are in any industry, at any company, I think it's imperative that you're familiarizing yourself with environmental, social impacts, the benefits, the costs, what's good, what's better. Nothing is going to be perfect. There is no easy switch, as we always say. But I think the more that you're just exposing yourself to these things and making this a normal part of your routine as you check on, updates on politics or updates on, food and dining and travel and luxury, whatever it is that you're into, make sustainability something that you're also into as well. So we'll leave you with that. And we'll touch base next week or the week after. Stay tuned. Next week is going to be our episode from Teresa McKinney at Nemo. You guys are going to love it. She's great. They're doing amazing work over there. So I'm excited to give you that. And then Mackenzie and I will be back the week after that to fill you in on more weekly highlights coming from the newsletter. So if you like what you're listening to, you guys, hit the subscribe button, follow us, do whatever you can, share it with a friend. All the show notes are on our website. Hit these articles on your own. And other than that, make sustainability a part of your day. Thanks, Mackenzie, for being here. Thanks for putting this together. I'll see you on the next show.
All right. Thanks, Derek. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Yeah. Bye, guys. Hey, thanks for listening. This is a show produced by the Underswell and our School of Understanding. If you're interested in being a part of this movement and want to dive deeper into the art of understanding sustainability better so that you can do things better, be sure to visit us at theunderswell.com. We offer structured, easy-to-follow workshops, courses, and member resources to make sustainability a part of your career or lifestyle. Because remember, no matter what role you play a role, and we're here for you. Thanks again.